Mr. Mitchell, you have exactly 60 seconds to vacate this property before we call the sheriff. The woman with the bullhorn stood at the foot of my driveway, surrounded by at least 100 people holding signs that read, "Pay your share" and "No free riders." She wore a crimson-red blazer tailored so perfectly it looked like armor, worn open over a black silk blouse with a plunging V-neck that seemed wildly out of place on a Montana mountainside. Her wine-brown hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders. Red heels sank slightly into my gravel, glossy red lips pressed into a thin, victorious line. Behind her, the mob chanted. Some wore matching vests that said Pine Valley HOA. Others filmed me with their phones, turning my front porch into their personal reality show. I stood there in my jeans and flannel, shotgun resting against my shoulder, not pointed at anyone, just there, and my dog Ranger growling low beside me. "Ma'am," I called down, voice steady, "this is private property. You're not welcome here." She smiled, cold, calculated. "This land belongs to the Pine Valley Homeowners Association. You've been living here for 4 years without paying a single cent in community dues. That ends today." The crowd roared approval. I felt my jaw tighten. "I don't belong to your HOA. Never did. Never will." "That's where you're wrong," she said, lifting a stack of papers like she was holding the 10 Commandments. "According to our revised boundary map, ratified and filed, your property falls well within our jurisdiction. You owe us $9,420 in back dues and fines." "Revised?" I laughed, sharp and bitter. "You mean forged?" Her smile didn't falter. 60 seconds, Mr. Mitchell. "Or we make this very uncomfortable for you." I looked at the faces in the crowd. Neighbors I'd never met. Strangers who'd driven up my mountain just to scream at me. People who thought a clipboard and a bullhorn gave them the right to my land. And standing at the center of it all, like a general commanding her troops, was Karen Whitmore, HOA president, liar, and the woman who just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because she didn't know what I knew. She didn't know about the forged documents, the fake boundary map, the emails between her and a regional water bottling company discussing acquisition strategies for my creek. She thought she could intimidate me off my own land. She was wrong. "You want me gone?" I said quietly, stepping forward to the edge of the porch. "You're going to have to drag me out in a body bag." The crowd went silent. Karen's smile finally cracked. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about dues. This was war. I moved to Montana for one reason: to disappear. After 15 years in downtown Denver, elbow to elbow with real estate developers, tech bros who thought community meant mandatory rooftop yoga, and neighbors who called the cops if your trash can was out past 7 in the morning, I was done. I wanted trees, wind, space, the kind of freedom no HOA newsletter could touch. So I cashed out everything, bought 3 acres just outside Whitefish, Montana, and built a cabin I'd been sketching in the margins of my notebook since college, all wood and stone, tucked into a slope with a natural creek running just a few dozen feet from the back deck. No fences, no neighbors within shouting distance, just the way I liked it. 4 years of peace. 4 years of photographing wildlife at dawn, chopping firewood, brewing coffee so strong it could wake the dead. I had my dog Ranger, a husky mix with one blue eye and an attitude problem. I had my cameras, my books, my solitude. It was simple, clean, mine. And then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday, I remember, because that's the day I usually drive into Whitefish for groceries and propane. A bland white envelope from the Pine Valley Homeowners Association. I almost tossed it into the wood stove on instinct, but something about the weight of the paper made me open it. Inside, 3 pages of dense legal text accusing me of being delinquent on community dues, specifically $7,865 with interest. I stood there on my porch, the letter flapping in the wind, Ranger sniffing at my boot like he knew trouble had arrived. I laughed out loud. My place wasn't in any community. I bought it because it wasn't. I had the deed, The legal surveys. I didn't even use the same water lines or electrical grid as the Pine Valley development half a mile downhill. Hell, I'd had to build my own damn road just to reach this place. I called the number on the letter. No answer. I tried again the next day. Voicemail. I left a calm message. There's been a mistake. I don't belong to your HOA. Please correct your records and stop sending threats. A week later, a second letter arrived. This one, with final notice stamped across the top in aggressive red ink. Then came the visit. It was early afternoon, maybe 3 days after the second letter. I was out in the shed organizing camera equipment when I heard tires on gravel. Unusual, my driveway is nearly a quarter-mile long, and no one comes up unless they're lost or delivering something. I stepped outside, wiping my hands on my jeans, and saw a sleek black SUV inching up the hill like it owned the place. Out stepped a woman who looked like she'd walked off the cover of a luxury real estate magazine, mid-40s. Striking in that sharp, polished way some women weaponize. Wine-brown hair styled in loose waves that somehow survived the mountain wind. She wore a crimson-red blazer, tailored expensive, worn open over a black silk blouse with a plunging V-neck, fitted black pencil skirt, red heels that had no business being on gravel, glossy red lips pressed into a professional smile, designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She looked at me like I was a raccoon on her porch. "Mr. Mitchell?" she asked, voice crisp. "That's me," I said. "Can I help you?" "I'm Karen Whitmore, president of the Pine Valley Homeowners Association." She said it like she expected applause. "We need to talk about your outstanding dues." I crossed my arms. "You're mistaken. This land isn't part of Pine Valley. I bought it outside the HOA zone." "That was the whole point," she smiled. Not kindly. "I'm afraid that's not accurate. Our revised development map ratified 2 years ago includes this parcel, which means you've been receiving the benefits of our community without contributing." "Benefits?" I almost laughed. "Ma'am, I built my own well, my own power system, my own access road. I've never used a single thing from your so-called community. Water flows downhill," she said smoothly, "and so do responsibilities. We can't have rogue properties undermining the cohesion of Pine Valley. It took every ounce of restraint not to say what I wanted to say." I walked inside, grabbed a printed copy of my deed, which I kept for exactly this kind of nonsense, and handed it to her. She didn't even glance at it. "You'll want to settle this voluntarily," she said, turning back toward her SUV. "Non-compliance can be messy." Then she left. Just like that. I stood there a long time after she was gone. Ranger growled low, sniffing at the tire tracks in the gravel. I patted his head. "Messy. Huh?" I muttered. "We'll see about that." I didn't sleep much that night. Not from fear, more like the kind of wired, bone-deep irritation that makes your skin buzz. I kept replaying that smug smile, the way she dismissed my deed without even looking at it, like my ownership of this land meant less than the HOA's stapled packet of delusion. The next morning, I found a white sedan parked just outside the tree line near my driveway. A man with a reflective vest and clipboard was walking around my property, stopping every few feet to jot things down. At first, I thought he was from the county. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and called out, "You lost?" He turned, startled. Mr. Mitchell? That's me. I'm with the Pine Valley HOA Compliance Division," he said, as if that were a real government department. "We're doing a visual survey of properties for code compliance." "There's no code to comply with out here," I said. "You're on private property. Turn around." He hesitated, then scribbled something on his clipboard and walked briskly back to his car. As he pulled away, I noticed a dash cam still recording. That same afternoon, I found a new envelope in my mailbox, thick with papers. They'd escalated. This one included an itemized list of violations. Unapproved exterior color, my cabin is natural wood. Natural growth neglect on more than 25% of visible land. I live in the woods. Non-compliant signage. I had a wooden plank near the mailbox that read, "If you weren't invited, turn back." Unauthorized structure adjacent to water source. my hand-built spring house to keep supplies cool. There was also a revised invoice, $9,420. They'd tacked on non-compliance fines and a retroactive infrastructure fee for infrastructure I'd never seen, used, or agreed to. By Friday, I'd counted 4 more drive-bys, different cars. Some parked for a few minutes, others crept slowly along the access road like they were on safari. One woman even rolled down her window and took photos of my house, my dog, my woodpile. Ranger barked at her like he knew exactly who she was. I started keeping my camera in my jacket pocket. Then came the online chatter. A neighbor I barely knew from town, Wade, ex-Forest Service ranger, quiet type, texted me, "Hey, heads up, they're talking about you in the HOA Facebook group, calling you a squatter with a gun compound." You should see the comments. I didn't have access to the group, obviously, so he sent me screenshots. Sure enough, there it was. My name, my address, photos taken from the roadside with captions like, "Refuses to follow community safety standards and possible threat." One post from Karen herself read, "We're doing everything by the book, but if residents want to hold a peaceful community demonstration near the disputed property, that is, of course, their right. Peaceful community demonstration." My ass. That evening, Wade showed up at my door with a 6-pack, and that look people get when they're about to tell you something you won't like. They're planning a show of force, he said. Not violence, but intimidation. Karen's trying to organize a gathering, people holding signs, marching up to your gate. She thinks that'll make you pay. She thinks that'll make me pay? I asked. Wade shook his head grimly. She wants to break you, paint you like a lunatic, so the county or sheriff steps in. Her goal isn't dues, it's control. I cracked open a beer and sat on the porch steps. You ever seen anything like this? Wade nodded. I spent 20 years dealing with people who think public land is theirs because they hiked it once. Different setting, same flavor. People like her, they operate on pressure, not law. I took a long drink. Then I better pressure back. The next morning, I installed trail cams around the perimeter, posted fresh no trespassing signs, printed a laminated copy of my deed and mounted it next to the mailbox. I also reached out to a lawyer in Kalispell who specialized in property disputes. Her name was Rachel Stevens. After 10 minutes on the phone, she said, "Sounds like you're dealing with an HOA that got a little too hungry. I've seen it before. I'll be up Monday." But over the weekend, things got weirder. First, a stranger, older man in a polo shirt parked just outside my property and stared at my creek for a good 15 minutes. Didn't take photos, didn't leave his car, just watched. Then, on Sunday morning, I woke up to find someone had left a flyer rolled into a plastic bag in my driveway. It read, "Is one man's defiance worth the stagnation of our entire community?" Below it, a blurry drone shot of my cabin, complete with GPS coordinates. It wasn't just about dues anymore. This was something else. I knew something was off the moment I opened the door Monday morning. It wasn't the birds, they were there as usual, chirping like they didn't care about jurisdictional disputes. It wasn't Ranger either. He was still snoring in the corner like a furry throw pillow. No, what struck me was the silence. No breeze. No rustle of trees. Just stillness, like nature itself was holding its breath. Then I saw the crowd. They were lined up at the foot of my property just outside the gravel drive. Dozens of them at first, holding signs with slogans like, "Pay your share," and "No free riders." Some wore HOA-issued vests. Others had matching shirts that read, "Community over chaos." And at the center of the mob stood Karen Whitmore, bullhorn in hand, practically glowing with self-righteous purpose. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a protest. This was an ambush. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee and stared. By the time I counted over 100 people, my hand had already reached for the phone. The dispatcher sounded unsure. "So it's a protest? On your land?" "No," I said. "They're camped at the edge. Technically not trespassing yet, but give them 10 more minutes and someone's going to hop the ditch. We'll send a unit." It took them 35 minutes. In the meantime, things got louder. Karen fired up her bullhorn and started delivering what she no doubt thought was a historic address. "We are here today," she shouted, "because we believe in equity, in fairness, in unity. This man, Grant Mitchell, has lived off our community for 4 years without contributing a single cent to our roads, our lighting, our safety. That ends now." Cheers erupted. Some folks held their signs higher. Others turned their phones on me, recording like I was the villain in a made-for-TV HOA melodrama. I didn't say a word, just sipped my coffee and filmed right back. Karen continued, voice rising with manufactured passion. "We've tried being civil. We've offered him the chance to come to the table. But he's hidden behind his paperwork and his so-called independence for too long. He's not above the rules," a guy in cargo shorts shouted. "Yeah, this ain't the Wild West. Someone else threw a water bottle. It landed 10 feet from my porch. That was enough." I called the sheriff again, didn't wait for polite explanations. When the deputies finally arrived, 2 of them, barely 25 years old and clearly not thrilled about the assignment, they walked up to me first. "Mr. Mitchell? That's me. Can you explain what's happening?" I pointed with my coffee mug. "Neighborhood lynch mob. HOA sponsored. They're saying I owe dues for a community I never joined." The deputy scratched the back of his neck. "Are they on your land?" "Not technically, but they're baiting it." One of the protesters stepped forward just then, waving a folded paper. "This is a notice of community arbitration," he declared. "We are invoking Article 9, Section B. Failure to comply triggers default enrollment." The deputy took the paper, skimmed it, and looked back at me. "You a member of their HOA?" "Nope." "Got proof?" I handed over the laminated copy of my deed. He read it, frowned, then turned to the protester. "Sir, unless you can prove jurisdiction, this gathering stays peaceful or it gets shut down. That includes shouting, throwing objects, or attempting to enter private property. Clear?" Karen stormed over, visibly irritated. That crimson blazer looked less like armor now, more like a costume that wasn't working anymore. "Deputy," she said sharply, "we have documentation showing this parcel was included in the 2022 boundary revision. He's been informed." "Was he consulted?" the deputy asked. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That's not relevant." "It's absolutely relevant," the deputy said. "Until a court recognizes that inclusion, this land is private and this man is under no obligation to you." Another wave of boos from the crowd. One guy in a visor yelled, "He's holding up the new park plan." Without his lot, we can't extend the bike path. Bingo. There it was, the slip, the real reason for all this noise. I turned to Karen, voice flat. "This isn't about dues. It's about expansion." Her face didn't twitch, but she didn't deny it either. The deputies made them back up 50 feet and warned that the next escalation would result in citations. The mob slowly dissolved into grumbling clusters. Someone shouted, "This ain't over!" As they trudged back to their SUVs and sedans, Wade appeared an hour later, arms crossed, that look again. "They're serious," he said. "And they're not going away." He handed me another flyer. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was anonymous, black and white, bold letters across the top. "He owns the water. We pay the price." Below that, a blurry aerial shot of my creek, circled in red. I stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at Wade. "They want the water," I said quietly. Wade nodded. "Always have." It took me less than a day to decide I was done playing defense. By Tuesday morning, Rachel Stevens arrived in a dusty Subaru with a briefcase, boots, and the kind of face that suggested she hadn't lost a case against an HOA in over a decade. She shook my hand firmly, surveyed the property like she was preparing to annex it, and said, "Let's burn them down. Legally." We set up shop at my kitchen table, spread out the paperwork like a war map, deed, county records, topo maps, and those glossy HOA newsletters with smiling families riding bikes over what they hoped would one day be my land. "They claim a boundary revision in 2022? She asked, skimming Karen's packet. "Yep, but I was never notified." Never signed anything. County has no record of it either. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Because that revision was never properly filed, and without majority vote or landowner consent, it's unenforceable. Their claim is built on a fantasy. She pulled out her laptop, started typing up a formal cease and desist, and filed it with the county clerk before noon. She also sent copies to the HOA board, the sheriff's office, and, my personal favorite, the local paper's legal desk. But the real win came that afternoon when Rachel returned from the county assessor's office with a grin. "You're going to love this," she said, flipping open a manila folder. "Back in 1998, your parcel was deliberately excluded from Pine Valley. By vote. Know why?" I shook my head. "Because the original HOA president accepted a payment from a private buyer to not annex your land into the development plan. There's a memo. It's in writing." I blinked. "Who the hell paid him?" "That part's redacted. The buyer used a shell company. But guess what else?" She pulled out another document. "That creek you're sitting on? It was flagged in a state resource report the same year. Classified as a Class A mineral-rich freshwater source. It's on the state water table. Extremely rare." I sat back. The dots connected themselves. Karen's HOA wasn't just foaming at the mouth over dues. They wanted the water. They wanted access. Control. Resale leverage. That bike path was just a cover for getting infrastructure through my land. And if I rolled over, they'd pave me out of existence. Rachel leaned forward. "This isn't a turf war. This is an attempted resource grab, and they know exactly what they're doing." I didn't say much. Just nodded and printed another copy of my deed, this time with highlighted passages, just to drive the point home. That evening, I got an email from a burner account. No subject. One sentence. "You really think you can keep this up alone?" Attached. A drone photo. My cabin. My creek. My woodshed. I sent it to Rachel. She replied within 5 minutes. Perfect. Cyberstalking. Let's add that to the suit. Over the next 2 days, Rachel built the case like she was preparing for war. We filed a harassment claim. We sent legal notices. We filed a temporary injunction request against any HOA incursion onto my land. We also dug deeper. Rachel pulled old plat maps, voting records, HOA meeting transcripts. What we found wasn't just helpful, it was explosive. In 2022, the same year Karen claimed the HOA expanded, the board minutes showed they had voted down a proposal to include my land. But a week later, Karen submitted a correction map to the county with my parcel manually added. No supporting documentation, no signatures, no landowner consent. Forgery, pure and simple. And we had it in black and white. I watched the protest footage again, zeroing in on one guy in particular, the one who yelled about the park plan. I found him in an old HOA newsletter. Name, Travis Brennan. Current board treasurer. Also, the owner of a local landscaping firm with contracts tied to the trail development project. They were planning to cut through my creek for access. Water and concrete don't mix unless you're planning to bottle it. Rachel's expression darkened. "We're filing an emergency motion, and we're suing. For damages, defamation, trespass, harassment, fraud." I looked out the window at the calm trees and humming wind. "Good," I said, "because they just made this personal." The courtroom smelled like new carpet and stale ambition. I sat at the defendant's table not because I'd done anything wrong, but because that's where you end up when an HOA with too much time and no breaks decides to sue you for non-compliance with community standards. The absurdity would have been laughable if I weren't already $22,000 deep in legal fees and short 3 weeks of sleep. Karen Whitmore sat across from me at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 2 lawyers dressed like hedge fund vultures. She didn't look smug this time. She looked composed. Too composed. That crimson blazer still perfectly tailored. Wine brown hair still styled in those loose waves. Red heels crossed at the ankle. Glossy red lips pressed into a thin line. The kind of confidence you get when you believe the system was built for people like you. Rachel leaned in. Stick to the facts. Don't get baited. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with reading glasses on, a pearl chain, entered, and the hearing began. The HOA lawyers started with dramatic flair, talking about civic harmony, obligations of shared ownership, and structural integrity of the community. It was like listening to someone describe a gated suburb as if it were ancient Rome. They presented maps showing my property within revised HOA boundaries, photos of my so-called violations, and emails between board members speculating that I was aggressively separatist. Then Rachel stood. She didn't bother with theatrics, just walked the judge through a series of documents. My original deed, county property maps, HOA board meeting minutes from 1998, and her personal mic drop, a notarized letter from a former HOA secretary confirming that my parcel was explicitly excluded from the community plan due to a private agreement. Then came the new gold mine, the falsified map Karen had filed in 2022, the one with my parcel manually added, no vote, no notice, no legal backing. Rachel held it next to the official rejected version and let the judge compare them like a game of spot the fraud. The judge's brow twitched. Karen's lawyer tried to salvage it. Even if the filing was improper, Mr. Mitchell still benefits from proximity to HOA infrastructure, Rachel cut in. My client built his own road. He uses no HOA utilities. He pays for private trash pickup. He maintains his own water supply from a creek that predates the development by over a century. The judge finally spoke. I've seen enough. The verdict? The HOA's claim was dismissed. On all counts. My land was reaffirmed as legally and structurally independent from the Pine Valley HOA. But the best part? The judge added a warning. Any further attempts to coerce or harass Mr. Mitchell will be considered actionable civil misconduct. Karen didn't look up when the gavel hit. She just sat there like she'd been deflated. But I knew better. This wasn't over. And I was right. 2 days later, I found my delivery from the local co-op dumped in the ditch. Fresh produce crushed. The box marked freeloader in red marker. Then I stopped receiving packages altogether. Amazon showed them as delivered. USPS marked items as refused. I confronted the delivery guy, who shrugged and muttered something about HOA rules. When I reminded him I wasn't in the HOA, he just looked at me and said, "Yeah, but you pissed them off." I tried posting my side of the story on the neighborhood nextdoor forum. My account was banned within minutes for disruptive behavior. Someone hacked into my Wi-Fi router and changed the network name to Mooch House. Another day, I found a flyer on my gate taped over my deed copy that said, "Community starts with contribution. Get in line or get out." It didn't stop there. Karen's people, what I started calling the inner circle, kept escalating in petty, plausible, deniable ways, blocking my access road with trash cans, accidentally reporting my generator as a fire hazard, sending anonymous letters to local businesses warning them I might be unstable. Rachel advised me to document everything, which I did. Photos, videos, screen captures, time-stamped logs. She was already drafting the next suit. Personal defamation, harassment, obstruction of commerce. But it wasn't just the law I had to navigate. It was isolation. People in town stopped waving. I'd walk into the hardware store and conversation would go silent. At the diner, I started noticing empty booths around mine. Like I had a smell no one wanted to catch. One guy I used to talk to at the feed store muttered "traitor" under his breath as he walked past, and yet, somehow, I wasn't surprised. This wasn't just a land grab anymore. This was war by reputation, and if Karen couldn't win in court, she'd try to kill me with whispers and waiting games. I'd won a battle, but she was betting I didn't have the stamina for the whole damn war. I didn't know what rock bottom looked like until I found myself watching a drone hover outside my window at 2 a.m. It wasn't the first time. In the last week alone, I'd spotted at least 4 different models buzzing over the treetops like curious mosquitoes, some with cameras, some with lights, one even with a damn banner that read, "Pay your share, Grant." It was surreal. I'd gone from mountain recluse to public enemy #1 in under 2 months, all because I had the gall to not pay dues to a club I never joined. But this one came close enough that I saw my own reflection in its lens. I didn't wave. Instead, I walked out onto the porch, shotgun in hand, and let the barrel speak for me. The drone zipped away like a startled crow. I didn't shoot it, not yet, but the message was clear. I was done being quiet. The next morning, Rachel filed the biggest lawsuit of her career. We sued Karen Whitmore personally, not just the HOA. Charges included defamation, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, trespassing, cyberstalking, and falsification of public records. We also named Travis Brennan, the HOA treasurer, for his role in the forged documents and his undeclared financial ties to the trail development project. And just to make it airtight, we subpoenaed the full HOA financials for the past 5 years. Turns out, the money trail was more twisted than I expected. Brennan's landscaping company had received over $180,000 in infrastructure contracts from the HOA. Many of these projects existed only on paper. One of them, a perimeter trail upgrade that was supposed to run along the border of my property. There were receipts, invoices, even a proposed blueprint complete with a segment cutting through my creek. The water was the key. It always had been. We found internal emails obtained legally via subpoena between Karen, Travis, and a representative from a regional water bottling company. They discussed potential acquisition of natural source and easement strategies for reluctant landowners. They even used my name, twice. Rachel's voice was cold steel as she laid it out for me. This wasn't about community, it was a business move. They wanted the land, the water, and the leverage. And when you wouldn't sell, they tried to take it by force of paper. I didn't say much, just stared out the window at the pine trees, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Not fear, not even anger anymore. Just a resolve so sharp it hurt to breathe. The case took shape faster than I imagined. A former HOA board member, Mary Ann Bishop, came forward after seeing the media coverage. She gave us minutes from a closed-door meeting where Karen proposed the boundary revision without public notice to avoid delays. She even admitted in the transcript, getting a hold of Mitchell's Creek would elevate our property values by at least 15%. They'd put a price tag on my life. The lawsuit became a headline. Water War in the Rockies, when HOA ambitions go too far. Local news ran a segment. I watched myself on TV, looking more tired than I remembered, while Rachel explained to the anchor how this case could set precedent for landowners facing rogue HOA expansion. A week later, Karen finally cracked. Her lawyer tried to settle quietly. No apology. No public retraction. Just an offer. Drop the suit, and they'd cease all efforts to claim jurisdiction. They even offered a small financial compensation, barely enough to cover my legal bills. I said no. We went to court. The trial was tense. Press showed up. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months hovered outside the courthouse like pigeons watching a street fight. Rachel delivered our case like a death sentence. Clean, measured, final. She brought out the forged documents, the drone footage, the financial records, the internal emails. She even played a voicemail I'd received at 3 a.m, a raspy voice whispering, "You're not safe up there forever." Karen's defense? Bureaucratic confusion, miscommunication, community intent. The jury didn't buy it. They deliberated for less than 3 hours. Verdict, guilty on all counts. Karen Whitmore was ordered to pay $285,000 in damages. Personally, the HOA itself was fined and placed under audit. Travis Brennan fled town the same night the verdict came in. The water company dropped their interest, pending further legal review. It was over, but it didn't feel like a victory. Not yet. It took weeks for the noise to die down, not the media noise that vanished in days. Scandals like this burn hot, then vanish as soon as someone in another town paves over a cemetery or yells at a school board. No, the noise I'm talking about was quieter, more personal. Suspicious stares at the feed store, glares at the post office, the uncomfortable silence in town when people realized Karen wasn't the villain in their story. They were. Most of the board resigned within a month. A few tried to stick it out, calling it a witch hunt, but the financial audit crushed that fantasy quick. Turns out, misusing HOA funds for fake contracts doesn't go down smooth with state regulators. Karen disappeared from public view entirely. Some said she moved in with her sister in Boise. Others swore they saw her crying in her Lexus outside the Pine Valley clubhouse. I didn't care. One afternoon, I got a knock on my door. It was Wade. Same Carhartt jacket, same tired eyes. "You won," he said. I just nodded. "But the way you fought back." He looked around the porch. It woke some people up. I invited him in for coffee. We didn't talk about the past, just trees, weather, what it feels like when a storm passes and the woods go still again. Later that week, I got an official letter from the county. My land was now recorded with a permanent covenant. It could never be included in any HOA without my explicit, notarized consent and a public hearing. The water rights were locked under private title. That creek, once a quiet trickle behind my cabin, now stood at the center of a legal fortress. But I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just went back to tending ranger, chopping firewood, photographing elk at dawn, until one day, I got an idea. I made a sign, hand-carved from cedar, sealed against the weather. I posted it at the edge of my driveway, right where the mob once stood, screaming. It read, "Free to all, so long as you respect what's not yours," and beneath it, a small wooden box. Inside, jars of wild huckleberry jam I'd made from berries along the creek. The mountain had worked hard, and I figured maybe it was time it gave something back to the valley, not because I owed anyone, but because I could. The end.